Before the onslaught of Chinese EVs, would you believe it, this was one of the best-selling electric vehicles in all of Europe. And in fact, the Renault Zoe is an electric vehicle that's been in our market for a very long time. And this is an updated model, which brings with it more performance, more battery range, and more importantly, or so it claims, several refinements that make the Zoe an even better car than it used to be. One small problem though, this is significantly more expensive than its primary competitor, which is the BYD Dolphin. And we're here to answer the question, is it worth the premium? My name is Ayman Abdullah, this is Malaysian Motoring. This is our review of the 2023 Renault Zoe R135. Now, before we get into the nitty-gritty of the review, we have to first start with the stats. So this is the R135. You can also get the Zoe as an R110. Either model is still powered by the same battery, which is a 50 kilowatt-hour usable battery, which in this particular model provides up to 380 kilometers on a full charge, whereas on the R110, it'll do about 390 kilometers on a full charge. Now, charging is done through the flap on the nose, where it will accept up to 50 kilowatt DC, or up to 22 kilowatts AC. Now for AC charging, that means a dead to full time in about 3 hours, whereas via DC charge you can get to from 10 to 80% in about 45 minutes thereabouts. Now that aside, one of the things that I feel the Zoe really has going for it are its looks. This is very much a European city car, which is why it is designed the way it is. It's very tall, it's not very wide, and it's kind of short, which means that it is perfect for use within town. In fact, this car has been very nippy, and because of the huge glass area on this car, it does mean that visibility is pretty good as well. When you are looking ahead, however, you will appreciate the fact this car comes as standard with Renault's LED Pure Vision, otherwise known as full LED headlights, replete with automatic LED high beam. You also get LED fog lights down there, as well as this very lovely purple color, which has made me sort of nickname this car the Grape. Now, one of the things that this Grape comes with as part of this package are these really nice bronze inserts on the grille as well as on these lower bumper corners, which I think look pretty good. In terms of aerodynamics, things are aided further by the fact there are actually functional air breathers here which create a curtain of air over the 16-inch alloy wheels, again to make this car a little bit more aerodynamically efficient. Now, talking about the side-on design of this car, as I mentioned earlier, this car comes as standard with 16-inch alloy wheels done in a dual-tone design with a diamond-cut face finish, and they're wrapped in Continental Conti Eco Contact tires. Now, these tires provide very good wet and dry weather performance while still maintaining pretty good NVH, which I think is a pretty good setup for this vehicle. Now from the side, you may notice that the rear door handles aren't immediately visible, and that's because they are actually hidden in the pillar. Now this certainly looks good, but in terms of usability, I have had some passengers get very confused as to how to open the rear doors. But the first time they get it, they get it. What I don't appreciate is the fact that it is indicated by this sort of thumbprint on the handle. Now, of course, it is obviously where you're supposed to put your thumb in order to open the door. The trouble is, this is also very difficult to clean, which of course is a problem that only I have because I insist on hand washing all my cars. Now, as part of the facelift or update of the Zoe, we now get new full LED taillights, replete with this sort of nice graphic as well as scrolling indicators, which I certainly appreciate. And the overall rear of the Zoe does look very cute. Admittedly, following this car on the motorway is quite a sight because 1, you don't see them very often, 2, I really like this color, and 3, the rather tall antenna on the back likes to wag so at speeds above 80 kilometers an hour, which makes this look like a very happy puppy. Now, in terms of practicality, behind this tailgate where you'll find the Bronze E and the Bronze E-Tech electric badge, you will find a pretty decent amount of space. Sure, we've got a lot of clutter in here right now because we've had to empty out another EV, but the Zoe comes as standard with a Type 2 to Type 2 cable, which is a very curious inclusion given the fact that the majority of AC chargers in this country come cabled. And what I would have really appreciated with this car is a 3-pin plug, because with the 50 kilowatt hour battery, that would mean that an overnight charge would yield about 30 to 40%. Ah well. In any case, as I mentioned, the space itself is quite usable, although there is a very big lip for you to get over should you be taking things in and out of the car. The rear seats do fold flat 60/40. The only trouble is that there is yet again another very large lip at the back, which means sliding stuff in and out will be a little bit of a challenge. And that rear bump that I mentioned earlier also houses the top tether for the ISOFIX mounts, which means that fitting a child seat is going to be a bit fiddly. The other thing that's a little bit fiddly is this parcel shelf, which of course is removable, like most parcel shelves are. And because it is small, you can theoretically, with a little bit of maneuvering or not, get it to sit in the boot if you can remove it in the first place, which I clearly cannot. Now inside, the Zoe does feel like a French car. Let me explain. There are some very nice design details, such as the little bronze accents on the steering wheel boss, as well as around the front aircon vents, which I certainly appreciate. There are also these sort of metallic finishes here and along the center aircon vents, as well as real metal, I've discovered, along the steering wheel, which I appreciate when it's cool, because when it's hot outside, it gets hot in here as well. But overall, the design is quite pleasant because as I look around, all of the fixtures and fittings in here look very visually appealing. You have these 3 knobs for the HVAC controls, replete with screens within them, which allow you to very easily select, choose, and of course make your selections and make it all very visible, which again, like I said, I like very, very much. All the buttons in here also have a rather sort of French feeling to them, in the sense that you know they're engineered very well, but they just feel very cheap. The same goes for the buttons on the steering wheel, which again just have a weird sort of clicky action to them, which feel like they should work, but
cancelling voice recognition
also triggers the car to talk back. Now, in terms of practicality, this car is a tale of two halves. So you have a ridiculous glove box, which half of which is taken up by the fuse box, because this car is right-hand drive. You do have a little cubby here, which is big enough to fit a card holder. You get your USB ports, your aux in, when was the last time you saw one of those, and a 12-volt socket, which I appreciate very much. You get the handbrake, the electronic parking brake here. You get a small cubby here, which is perfect to put a mobile phone. You get a couple of cup holders here, which are large enough to fit a bottle, although this is more comfortably seated in the door bins. There's also a little bit of space behind that bottle holder, as well as a little cubby here for you to put, I don't know, keys, I guess. But more importantly, not the Renault key, because the key card doesn't fit in here. It should probably fit in that, although you really want to keep it in your pocket because it will rattle about and make quite a lot of noise. Now, in terms of the seating position, this steering wheel can be adjusted for both reach and rake, which is certainly very appreciated indeed. Now, the problem is the seat itself. While it is very comfortable, it only slides fore and aft, and the backrest only goes front and rear, obviously. You may be wondering why I'm complaining, and that's because for this money, the fact that this seat doesn't have height adjustment or lumbar support is pretty noteworthy, because it does mean that when you're driving long distance, you will notice that lack of support. However, overall quality in here is not bad. You do get some soft touch here, and the tops of the dashboard is kind of soft, but everything else is very hard, very scratchy plastic. I do appreciate, however, that at least they put a little bit of textile here on the armrest. Oh well. Now, in the back, life is interesting. So with this seat set up in my driving position, I have a decent amount of knee room, about that much, and about the same in headroom. For reference, I'm about 170-ish centimeters, I think. And the floor in this car in the rear is actually a little bit higher than in the front, which means with my legs set up like this, I don't really have much in terms of under thigh support. And if I tuck my feet in underneath in front of me, I can't quite get them far enough for there to be under thigh support, which is interesting. Now, those two center cup holders that I showed you in the front, you can actually access from the rear, which means rear occupants are relatively well suited or well catered for. You do get some door bins, although I don't think they can fit a bottle in here. At least one of those plastic disposable bottles might be able to fit. And that's great because there is no center armrest with more cup holders, and there aren't even pockets behind the rear seats. Now, mercifully, however, these rear seats do appear to be quite flexible, which means if this seat was pushed even further back, I should be able to push my knees into the seat in front of me. Although honestly, I am beginning to struggle a bit with this car because the BYD Dolphin is significantly larger. Now, one thing that the Renault does have over the Dolphin is a front ISOFIX mount for this seat, which means you could theoretically put 3 child seats in this car or put one there and then put one adult passenger in the rear. But yeah, maybe it redeems itself with the way it drives. Now, because we're in the R135, that means that this car is powered by a 135 horsepower motor in the front, which also produces 210-ish Newton meters of torque, which means 0 to 100 is completed in about 7-ish seconds. The top speed, I think, is something like 180 kilometers an hour. Not that that's really relevant in a car like this, but there we are. Now, the thing about the Zoe is that, as I mentioned several times throughout this video, this is ultimately a city car. It's positioned as a city car, and therefore it ought to be used as a city car. And as a city car, the Zoe does perform quite well. For starters, you get excellent visibility all the way around, including over the shoulder, despite what those C-pillars might suggest. And thanks to the little quarter lights on the windows, it does mean that you get pretty good view out sort of at an angle as well. On top of that, the R135 comes as standard with several safety features, including blind spot monitoring, which means that driving in town is relatively easy. On top of that, the NVH in this car at speeds below 80 kilometers an hour is also quite commendable. You get very little wind noise, if at all, and you get very little in terms of road noise, although I've no doubt those Continental tires are working very hard to ensure that this car remains quite quiet. And in terms of performance, the Renault Zoe R135 specifically does seem to have enough poke to sort of go about its day. The torque, of course, which arrives instantaneously, does work very well for this car. And so it does mean that through cut and thrust traffic, it's very easy for you to nip in and out of gaps and so on. It also means that when you're driving through city centers, it means that you'll be able to get up to speed and fill in gaps and so on, as you'd expect a good city car to do. But what impresses me about the Zoe is the way it rides, particularly in town as well as out on the open road. So naturally, this car has a slightly softer suspension setup, although obviously not as soft as what you get from BYD, but still soft enough. And as a result, it means that the primary and secondary ride in this car is quite commendable for something this small. Usually vehicles with short wheelbases and narrow tracks don't particularly do well in this regard, but the Zoe does seem to do commendably well. And that doesn't mean that it's just good in town, because out on the motorway at speeds of up to 110, 120 kilometers an hour, this car has the sort of road manners you'd expect from something bearing a European badge. It's very confident, it's very planted, and it feels very stable, particularly at higher speeds. Although that's kind of where the good things end, unfortunately, because for the Zoe, when you are driving it at higher speeds, you will find that there is quite a bit of wind whistle. It is broadly on par with what you'd get from, say, a Honda City hatchback or a Toyota Yaris, but it's not great. And it's certainly a little bit noisier than what you'd get from BYD's Dolphin, let alone the Atto 3. And then on top of that, when I mentioned the safety features earlier, the blind spot monitoring is great, the lane centering is great, it also has AEB, which is great. The trouble is that for a city car, particularly at this price point, I would have expected to find traffic jam assist or radar-guided cruise control at the very least. That's because if you're going to be spending most of your time in town, that also means chances are you're going to be spending most of your time stuck in traffic. And if you're in traffic, a self-driving system or a level 2 semi-autonomy system goes a very, very long way towards making the driving experience a little bit more pleasant. Unfortunately, the Zoe in any guise does not come with that, which I find very disappointing indeed. And then there's the charging. So as I mentioned earlier, this car can charge up to 50 kilowatt DC or about 22 kilowatt AC. Now the 22 kilowatt AC charging is very commendable. This puts it on par with vehicles like Smart's new #1, because it does mean that if you can find a 22 kilowatt AC charger, which genuinely are not really that rare, you can actually charge this car quite meaningfully in a matter of an hour or two. In fact, over 2 hours, you'll be able to add well over 50% charge, which is precisely what you'd want from a car like this. Actually, no, over 2 hours, it should be about 70% charge, which again, is great for a car like this because you're going to spend time in malls or at the office or whatever, and if you have a 22 kilowatt hour charger there, it means that essentially your car will always have a full battery. The trouble comes with DC charging because normally Malaysians will be using DC charging when we drive over long distances, which means we want to stop, juice up the car in maybe about 20-30 minutes, and then off you go. But at 50 kilowatts, this car will need about 45 minutes to go from 10 to 80%, which is a little bit irritating because I feel that 45 minutes is a little bit too long to wait at an R&R or any sort of rest stop when you're trying to travel over longer distances and trying to cover a little bit more ground. And so even though this car does have a relatively small battery, I would have appreciated faster charging. Something around the 60 or 80 kilowatt sort of speed, which is what you'd get from the BYD Dolphin, which again would enable to charge this car a lot more meaningfully when you are stopped for about 10 to 20 minutes at a roadside stop. The other problem with that 50 kilowatt charging is that the majority of DC chargers in Malaysia charge per minute as opposed to per kilowatt hour. If you charge at a per kilowatt hour charger, then it doesn't really matter that this car doesn't charge very quickly because ultimately whatever speed it is that it's doing, you're only paying per kilowatt hour recharge. The trouble arrives when you are using those per minute chargers because if, let's say, you were to stop at a Shell recharge, which can charge up to 180 kilowatt DC, but also charges 4 ringgit a minute, you're going to be spending a lot of money because this car is going to be stuck there for a long time because it cannot accept any more than about 50 kilowatts. On top of that, in my testing, this car is only really topped out at about 46 kilowatts at a DC charger, which means that, again, you'll be spending more time waiting for the car to charge. So all in all, what does this mean for the Zoe? Well, firstly, you have to bear in mind that its biggest competitor is, again, the BYD Dolphin, which is about 50,000 ringgit cheaper, is better spec'd, is slightly larger, does more range, and has an LFP battery which you can charge up to 100% every single time. Whereas the Zoe's more conventional EV architecture and EV engineering means that you're supposed to only charge this to 80% on a daily basis and only use that final 20% when you absolutely need to, which in a city car is a huge detraction. However, the 22 kilowatt AC charging does mean that if you have a Charge EV subscription, for example, and so you can best make use of AC chargers, it does mean that when you do find the odd 22 kilowatt charger, you can meaningfully charge your Zoe, which means you'll be spending less time and less money either charging at home or charging via public DC chargers and so on. So it is sort of a mixed bag. There are some parts of this car that are very good and there are some parts of it that are very disappointing. Now, the particular issue that I have with this is the fact that when you put all of this together, it means that the Zoe is not the easiest vehicle to recommend because on one hand, it is a very competent city car. And in fact, if the BYD Dolphin didn't exist, it would be a pretty easy car to recommend because without the Dolphin, this would probably be the best city EV that money could buy. The trouble is the Dolphin exists and it is cheaper while offering more, which means it is better value. And as most of you know, we are all about value here at Malaysian Motoring, which means looking at the Zoe, it's very difficult to recommend. But I suspect that there are going to be some of you whom, like me, put a particular amount of stress on having cars that are different. If you do not want to be seen in the same car that everybody else has, which I suspect the Dolphin is about to be, because it's basically an electric Myvi, then maybe the Renault Zoe might appeal to you because admittedly in this violet blueberry color, which is the official tone for this, it is different. You are never going to see another Zoe out there because there are really not that many there at all. Unless of course this video does very well and all of you listen to me. And so if you want something that is different, while not really compromising too much in terms of everyday usability, then the Zoe does appeal somewhat, if you're willing to look at it in that very specific light. But if you think that your EV, or any car for that matter, ought to be driven primarily by value, which I think is usually the best way to look at cars and life in general, then maybe not. You would more likely be enticed by the better performance, range, and standard specifications offered by BYD's Dolphin. And if you haven't seen that review, you can check it out here. But if you just want to be different, and you have to admit the French are very good at being different, then maybe the Zoe is worth a look. Just a look, maybe. In any case, that's been our review of the 2023 Renault Zoe R135. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, hit the little bell icon to be notified every time we make a new upload. Don't forget to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. All the links are in the description below. If you'd like to be part of our new WhatsApp channel, you can also find the link to that in the description. Thank you so much for watching. We'll catch you in the next one. Take care, stay safe, and jangan bodoh.